This was built over what was originally here, the cathedral, because Christianity is superior to paganism. And here is part of that original Aztec temple that they discovered recently. This was part of the temple. 84,000 human beings sacrificed to inaugurate this temple in 4 days. You saw the model there. This is part of that Aztec temple. It was probably a lot like what we saw yesterday when we were climbing the pyramids and so on, a big complex. Why do you think they built the church over top of it? Both because they used the stones and everything, but also it's a symbol that Christianity conquers paganism. Whenever you allow it to, Christianity will always be superior. It'll always bring the real truth and a real respect for human dignity and human life. But what happened here was they had sacrifices that were unbelievable. Even the people, the Spanish who had known about human sacrifices in times past were stunned and shocked by what was going on with the Aztecs. They had 38 major cities, and each one of those had to offer 1,000 people a year for the gods. When they inaugurated the temple here, the big one that we saw there in the model, the Aztecs wrote that they had sacrificed 84,400, I think 82,400, something, that number of human beings in 4 days, because what they believed, can you imagine that? And they said that also the majority of them were young men, but there were also women, and that the basic assumption is what they found in the bones and so on, that 1 out of 5 babies was used as a sacrifice. 1 out of 5 babies used as a sacrifice. What they believe, well, I'm going to go 2 tracks on this. First of all, we say, how horrible is that? Back in biblical times, they had human sacrifices. Here they had human sacrifices, a lot of times babies. And we say that's horrible. That is absolutely repugnant. And what they would do here, the way they would do it is they would take the people up, and 4 priests would take them to the top of the temple. They didn't do anything in the temple. Everything took place because they believed that the gods had sacrificed their blood and given their life so much to create the world, and it started here, that the blood of the gods was shed and sacrificed for the people, so that the people now had to give the blood back. This is very biblical in a sense, because it says the life is in the blood, and they realized that the life was in the blood. The most precious offering that they could offer to the gods was human blood, and that's what they did. And the way they would do it is they take these sacrifices, these people, up to the top of the temple. 4 priests would hold them down, and then a 5th priest, and I've got pictures of all this stuff here. I should actually pass it around for you to look at while we're talking. But they would take them up, and these are drawings from the Aztecs themselves. And here's some of the flint knives and what they did there, and pictures of what I'm going to hold on to this one for a minute. And they would hold, 4 of them would hold the victim down, and then the 5th priest would take the flint knives that you'll see in those pictures, and they have found lots of them at the temples, and they would slice them across the chest, right below the rib cage, cut their abdomen open. They would reach up and rip their hearts out while they're still beating, and they would hold it up to the gods. And they would spill the blood, and then they'd push the body down those steps and roll, and then they would collect the skulls too. And they they cut the head off, and they would peel the face off and use it actually as a mask. And they would drill holes through the temples, and they would put poles through there, and they had, like, I have a picture of it here, what they would have. They found thousands and thousands of these heads that were used as, you know, as an offering to the gods, of all of these skulls. And they just said the skulls were, they couldn't even count them all, how many that there were. And the blood would be given to the gods. The name of their god, I don't know in their language how to pronounce the word, but it meant, the word means the lover of hearts and the drinker of blood. That was what their god was, the lover of hearts and drinker of blood. So they would rip out the heart, hold it up to God, and then there's pictures you'll see that I'm handing out. Oh, this one especially, of them eating the body parts. They were cannibals. They would eat the flesh too. They would eat legs, and they would eat the arms and things. And you see them all there chewing and eating with their god. They're he's approving of this action. So when they offered these human sacrifices, this is the way I want to go first, and then I'm going to talk about the blood and the body. But the way they offered these sacrifices, these babies, we say that's really horrible. But even in biblical times, and many times they had human sacrifices. Moloch, who was a god of during biblical times, it was a big cast iron god, and he had a big hole in his belly and eyes that were open, so they'd start a fire inside. I mean, this god was sometimes as big as that, huge. And he had big arms like this made of cast iron with his hands out. They'd build a fire in that god until it was red hot, and then on the day of the feast for Moloch, they would bring all the people from the province and the village, and they would, all of them, they would take babies. They'd offer, now you get to offer your baby, and you'd become a hero because you are offering your special baby for the good of the whole community. Maybe you could bring your baby too, see, and then they would choose them, and it'd be an honor to give the baby to this god, because this god was the god of fertility. He brought the rains, he brought the prosperity, and so on, Moloch and Chemosh. And on the day of the feast, they'd all have dancing and singing and the pipes playing and the drums, and they would bring the baby and they'd lay him on the hands. They're already red hot because the fire is so hot. It's like steaming and red. You know what iron is like? It's hot. And they'd drop the baby in the hand like a steak on a grill. Then they'd push the baby, he'd roll down the arms into that big fire in the belly, and you'd never even hear the baby scream because of the music and the pipes. It was like this huge unholy mass and an orgy going on because it was all sexual part. And you say, that's horrible. How could people do that? And yet in America, we still worship those same gods. And we still make human sacrifices to them. But the only difference is this God's now, his name is abortion. And people in America not only accept it, but they have legalized it, and they're expecting us to pay for it. Celebrate it and pay for it. It is the pagan, it is the whole liberal left. That is their main sacrament. They view this as a sacrament, and don't ever think they're going to give that up, because they're going to defend that sacrament to the end. And they are willing to give up their human babies for their own prosperity, for their own ease of life, or maybe they just don't want to admit they made a mistake in the back seat of a car one Friday night. So here we see what's happening, but our country is just as pagan as that, because when you compare how many babies they've killed or humans they killed, and we kill far more than that in the United States in a year. Now, the other angle I want to go, and then I'll be done, is in these human sacrifices, the blood was the most precious possession, and they were giving the blood of humans back. One of the things that the missionaries did, and they mentioned it in the movie in Guadalupe yesterday, I've been talking about this, and I was really intrigued that he said the same thing. I don't think he got it from me. I probably got it from him somehow. I don't know. But when the missionaries came, they could say that you have something going here with this human sacrifice. You're onto something. There needs to be a sacrifice. There needs to be blood shed. But you don't have to kill 50,000 people a year in your temples to do that, because the one real human has come from heaven. God became a man, and he already offered his body and his blood for you. And so you don't have to do it over and over again, because he is an eternal. His is good to cover everybody. He has sacrificed himself. Now, when they took these sacrifices up their temple, sometimes I told you that they took the skins off and make a mask. And sometimes they had these they called them the idols, or the image of God. And they would actually start calling this one God. They would call them gods, and they would say, like, you'd get all dressed up and you're the next sacrifice. They would start calling you by names of God. You're the Lord, or you're the lady. And they would say that God has become flesh among us. What does that sound like? They were onto something, although it was twisted and perverted and grotesque, but there was something there that is primal in the sense of knowing even what we know as Catholics to be the truth. So they would put this costume on you. You would become the image, and they would worship you as God, and then they would kill you as God. And your blood would be there to feed the God in heaven, the drinker of God, the lover of hearts and the drinker of blood. So when the first Catholics came here, they said you don't need to kill people like that and shed the blood, because the blood has already been shed. It's already been done by the God-man who came, and his is an eternal sacrifice. Therefore, it's big enough and good enough to cover all of you. You don't have to do this anymore. And it made a possibility for them to see that they didn't need that, because a human had already come and died, but he was God too. He had come, the flesh God had come among us in a much more spectacular way than what they were doing by just putting face masks on and dressing them up like gods. And so now you see them drinking blood and eating body parts. And guess what? I know it sounds macabre, but what are we going to do in a half an hour? We are going to eat the flesh and drink the blood of the God-man who came down and on an altar sacrificed himself and shed his blood. So you see the parallels, how you could bring this gospel to these people and you could share it with them, and it paralleled in their very grotesque practice, but they could see the truth of what Christianity was, and now they could have the body and blood, not in cannibals in any way, stretch the imagination, because it's a sacramental, bloodless form, but we are eating the real presence of Christ, and we are doing what they wanted to do but didn't know how to do, and kept killing their own people to do it. So that's just a few things I wanted to share while we're here, so you understand what happened there and how it relates to what's happening in our pagan country right now with the offering of infant sacrifices. and also to understand how in the Mass how we were able to relate to these people, what they were doing, and show, yes, you're onto something, but it's very grotesque and perverted and twisted. Let me show you the way it really is, and now you can have the real God who has sacrificed himself, and the blood is really there still for us today. I remember when I was a Protestant, we used to sing, "What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus," right? Well, we wanted the blood, but we didn't have it. Now today in the Catholic Church, I have the blood. I have the body and blood of Christ. I don't sing that I wish we had it. Now I know we have it, and we're going to celebrate that in the half an hour now. So anyway, here's some more pictures if you want to see them. These guys. Oh, and it says right here, in ancient Mexico, human sacrifice was an offering to the gods of people's most precious possession, their blood. The custom that most startled the Spaniard ritual was cannibalism, was a fact of the attainment. It was an attaining of a spiritual ideal. The eating of the body and drinking of the blood of those that were sacrificed was true communion with God. And what are we going to do in a half an hour? We're going to have true communion with God, and we don't have to kill any of you to do it. Isn't that cool? All right, so that's just a few things I wanted to share.